Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katie Smoller. I am the Director of Educational Programs here at the National History Academy. And today we are continuing our tour through different historic sites across the country, and we are joined today by Park Ranger Catherine with the Flight 93 National Memorial. So Catherine, thank you so much for being here with us today, and we'd love to hear more about this memorial.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be here representing Flight 93 National Memorial and the National Park Service. And today I'm going to tell you all a little bit about Flight 93 National Memorial and what a special place it is. So I'm going to start by sharing a screen of a winter scene because people don't often think of what it looks like in the wintertime. And I promise you, in the wintertime, Flight 93 is covered in snow, but it's a magical time to be here. And Flight 93 National Memorial is located in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. It's in southwestern Pennsylvania. And I'm going to bring up the map here. There we go. And we're closer to Pittsburgh than we are to Harrisburg or the other side of the state, and in the Laurel Highlands. Here's a map of the overview of the site. And the memorial consists of 2,200 acres. The vast majority of what is Flight 93 National Memorial today was once an open face coal mine. So when you look at this map, the area that you see without a lot of trees had once been a surface mine or open face coal mine. And that area didn't have trees whenever September 11th, of course, happens. And the memorial is designed around the flight path. But the first thing that you'll see is the Tower of Voices when you drive into the memorial. And this is one of my favorite pictures of the tower. The Tower of Voices is constructed at the entrance of the memorial, welcoming visitors in. No better place to have a doorbell than at your front door. And the 93-foot tall tower contains 40 wind chimes. Each is tuned to their own note and key, representing 40 unique passengers and crew members. And this shot is from the day that we dedicated the wind chimes. And that was during COVID. It was September of 2020. And the sun is setting. It's this really incredible image. And you can see the wind chimes the whole way up through it. There's 8 tiers of 5 wind chimes. The second phase of construction at the memorial was the visitor center. And this is an aerial view taken as we were getting ready for one of the September 11th events here. And you can see how the memorial was designed around the flight path. And I will try to draw it for you guys so you can see it a little bit better. But this black sidewalk that pierces through is actually the flight path of Flight 93. And when you're standing in the parking lot, you don't see right away that these two walls block your view of everything except for that flight path. And it will take you to an overlook. And the overlook will let you look down and see the crash site down below. And on the glass panel, it reads, "A common field one day, a field of honor forever." And those are the words of Stephen Ruda. He was a fire chief in Los Angeles, California, and wrote those words on a tribute that was left here at the memorial in the very early days, the days following September 11th. At the Memorial Plaza, which was the third and final phase of, or the first phase of construction, sorry, it was finished in September of 2011. The wall of names is along the flight path, and it ends here at this wooden gate, which is only opened on September 11th. And the boulder physically marks the crash site. So the 17-ton sandstone boulder is at the edge of the hemlock grove, marking where Flight 93 went down. And this is an incredible picture because it just happened to be on a very rainy day, caught a rainbow over the wall of names. And it lists each of those passenger and crew members alphabetically, and the rainbow went over the crash site. And it's just something to say how special this place is, and it's honoring the passengers and crew members. So the story, of course, revolves around this plane and the people that were on it. And this is an image of Flight 93. This picture was taken actually 2 days before September 11th at Chicago O'Hare Airport. And it's the only known image of Flight 93 before it took it off. This plane is the only hijacked plane that was also taking off from Newark, New Jersey, and it's heading to San Francisco. The other 3 planes, 2 of them, Flight 11 and Flight 175, were out of Boston, heading to Los Angeles. And then Flight 175 out of Dulles, just outside of DC, also heading to Los Angeles. Flight 93, because it's taking off from Newark, is going to be delayed for 25 minutes. And that's something that we'll add into the story in a little bit. But here are the 40 individuals aboard. And a lot of people will ask us, well, weren't there more? And in 2001, it wasn't irregular for a flight to be half empty. And in fact, that's why this is one of the flights that was selected to be hijacked, because there were so few passengers and crew members, the hijackers thought that they could easily overthrow them. So Flight 93 will board very early that morning, gets delayed on the tarmac, and eventually will get the go-ahead to take off at 8:42. But at 8:42, nothing has happened yet. And it's wild to think when it finally does take off, all 4 planes that were hijacked that morning are in the sky. And for 4 minutes, nothing has happened. The first tower will be struck at 8:46. And that's American Airlines Flight 11. And those of us that remember that morning will remember that it wasn't a hijacked plane, what the media was telling us. It was a small airplane. Maybe the plane had lost its way somehow, the pilot had had a heart attack, something to that effect. Hindsight, it's an awfully big hole in the side of that building. 17 minutes later is when the second tower is struck. And for those of us that were watching it on TV or listening to the radio, we'll never forget that feeling of realizing that it's not some freak thing, that 2 planes don't hit 2 of the tallest buildings in the United States within 20 minutes of each other. So as that's unfolding, aboard Flight 93, a little over 20 minutes later, is when the plane will be hijacked. And we know this primarily because of the Mayday call that goes out from either Jason Dahl or Leroy Homer from the cabin, or from the phone calls that are made immediately following the hijacking. So in just 20 minutes, there will be 37 phone calls made. And those phone calls will help piece together the story that is unfolding on Flight 93, but also the one that's happening on the ground. What's going on in New York? What's happening at the Pentagon minutes later? And they learn from their loved ones that if they don't do something, that there's a strong likelihood that this plane is also heading to a building, and many other lives will possibly be lost. So the passenger and crew members of Flight 93 will take a vote, putting the truest form of democracy into action, and they're going to decide to do something. This image shows where the hijackers were sitting before they hijacked the plane, but also where the passenger and crew members were seated when the plane took off. And you can see they're all pretty much in the middle or the front of the plane. And when the hijackers storm the cockpit and that Mayday call goes out at 9:28, everyone's going to be pushed to the back of the plane. And that's where they make the phone calls. We kind of forget in 2022 that not everyone had a cell phone in 2001. In fact, only 10% of our population had a cell phone. So of those phone calls, only 2 are cell phones. And the other ones are all airphones that they're making the phone call in the back of the aircraft using a credit card. And it's going to leave an important trail of information for the FBI and CIA when the investigation is happening of who made phone calls, how long the phone calls lasted, where they were made from. And it helps tell the story that unfolded aboard Flight 93 for those of us on the ground. 9:37 is when the Pentagon's hit. And it's not going to be long after the Pentagon is hit by Flight 77 that the passenger and crew members are going to start storming the cockpit. And this image kind of gives you an idea of the timeline of how everything unfolded. So from 8:42 when the first, or when Flight 93 takes off, 8:46, the first tower is struck, 9:03, when Flight 93 is hijacked, and then when the fight will start aboard the plane. So the passenger and crew members will start storming the cockpit door, and the hijackers will respond by rolling the plane's wings and a series of porpoise maneuvers, aggressively diving and then climbing the plane, all while the passenger and crew members continuously try to get into that cockpit door. We know that because of the cockpit voice recorder picking up sounds of that fight, what's going on. And it picks up English speaking voices saying, into the cockpit, if we don't, we'll die. Someone get him now. And one of the very last things at about 10:03 is an English speaking man shouting the word no. And Flight 93 pitched into the ground at 563 miles an hour and hits the area that had once been surface mined. This picture is taken from a mile away, about 60 seconds after Flight 93 had gone down. And it's titled The End of Serenity. And in so many ways it was. When first responders arrive on the scene, the very first fire company arriving is from Shanksville. It's a volunteer fire company. They'll arrive in just 8 to 10 minutes. Rick King was the assistant volunteer chief for Shanksville Volunteer Fire Company. And he was in Shanksville. He hears the plane approaching. He's talking on the phone to his sister. And he hangs up with her and says, I'm pretty sure a plane is in Shanksville. And then he hears the explosion. He's like, I'm pretty sure it just crashed here. I've got to go. I'll tell you what's up whenever I get home. He runs to the fire station, answers the phone call from 911 responders. And when he gets out to the scene, he doesn't see what he expects. Watching what was unfolding in New York and at the Pentagon, they expect to see or save lives and help people, but there is just a smoldering of the hemlock groves. What's happening here in this picture, you've got state police arriving, fire companies walking the site. You can actually see a tire from Flight 93 here at the edge of the crash site. And in this image, the hemlock grove immediately in the back of the crash site is on fire. There was 5,500 gallons of jet fuel still aboard Flight 93 when it crashes, and it catches that whole area on fire. But what's unique about Flight 93's crash site compared to the other 3 crash sites is that the investigation can start immediately. And within minutes of the plane going down, a state police officer walking the edge of the crash site will find this card laying against one of the bases of the hemlock grove. And this ATM bank card belonged to Z.I. Jarrah. He's the hijacking pilot of Flight 93 and purchased the tickets for the hijackers to get aboard the plane that day. So as the investigation continues, we are going to start looking for the black boxes. And the black boxes are going to tell the story of the plane itself, what happened in the cockpit, as well as what's going on with the elevation of the airplane. And the hemlock grove, so just so you can see, is right here. And the physical crash site is all right in this area. And first responders are going to dig down like an archaeology dig. And you can see here in this image, they're sifting through every shovel full of dirt, looking for every possible piece of evidence. And it's a lot of work. They're going to be going through looking for anything they can find. And these are all pieces of the plane because it hit an area that had been surface mined. For lack of better words, it's like a sandbox, and the ground's so soft, the plane just goes right into it, collapses into the ground, and is obliterated whenever it hits the edge of the old coal mine. The black boxes are going to be found at 15 feet and 25 feet in depth inside of the crater. So this is one of the black boxes. And here is the other one. And they are the only 2 usable black boxes recovered from September 11th. I don't know why I did that. This image is of pieces of the aircraft that were collected from inside of the crater. And they would fill 4 large shipping containers from pieces of Flight 93. After the 13-day investigation, in total, they will recover over 90% of Flight 93, the vast majority of it being inside of that crater. The Friday following September 11th is when the families first came to the site. And in this image, you can see the investigation happening right here along the edge of the tree line. And it's the only time that the investigation stopped is when Mrs. Bush and the families visited the crash site. Everything froze during that hour or so that the families were up visiting, seeing where Flight 93 went down. And this would become the very first memorial. It's what we call the Hebel Memorial, started by the families. And we'd have memorials popping up all over in Somerset County, on the roads that border the crash site, the courthouse. And by November, all of the memorials were culminated then in the middle of this field. And a group of volunteers would form, and we call them our ambassadors. Today we have nearly 60 ambassadors, and here's a small grouping of them. And these are some of our earliest ambassadors, actually. We have a handful that have been here for over 20 years now, telling this story to people that would come out on the snowiest of days, the hottest of summer days, the rainiest days. And they are here because they love this story and to tell what happened aboard Flight 93 and the courage of the crew and passengers. A couple years ago, we were able to bring the wreckage of Flight 93 back here to the memorial, and it is now interred in the back of what is today the crash site and debris field. So it's not visible to the public, and it's actually, marked with just a couple boulders and wildflowers planted throughout that field, but the wreckage of Flight 93 has been interred there. We kept a handful of things out, like the engines and pieces that will help tell us the story in the future. But the wreckage of Flight 93 is also interred on the crash site. And something that we do every year, of course, is honor the passenger and crew members every day, and specifically on September 11th. This past year was the 20th observance. And on the big anniversaries, such as the 20th or the 25th, we do a program called the Luminaria, which we will light lanterns down at the wall of names, one for each passenger and crew member. And that's what you see here in this image. And it's a very incredible, moving experience. This year we had over 1,000 people attend this particular program. And on September 11th, we do the ceremony, which of course starts at around 9:30 in the morning, but occurs over the time of impact. And the bells that you see here are the bells of remembrance. And these bells are brought out only on September 11th for the ceremony, that when we read the names of each of the passenger and crew members, the bells will each be tolled then. And for this past year, we had the Tunnels to Towers visit the site, and we backlit the Tower of Voices with one of the beams of light similar to what they had in New York City for the Twin Towers. Flight 93 and the Pentagon also participated, and this is from this past year for the 20th observance. And the only day that the wooden gate at the Memorial Plaza is open, the last time stamping at the very end of the flight path. And on September 11th, only family members can go out through that gate to the crash site. So that is Flight 93 and our story in a nutshell. And I wanted to make sure that we had time if there were any questions as well.
Thank you, Catherine, so much for that. We do have some questions, so we're going to bring on Ben Kellerhals. He's our intern here with National History Academy.
Hi, Catherine. Great presentation, touching stuff, and I suppose we'll get into some questions, okay?
Perfect.
Right. So firstly, we have a question about the design, and who came up with that, and was there other designs in consideration?
That is a great question. And Flight 93 is kind of unusual in the terms of national park sites because we were designed by a competition. There were 1,100 entries from all over the world. Over 15 countries sent in applications to be involved in the design competition. And it was hosted that then the public could comment on the designs. They had to meet specific criteria. So they had to have a natural element. They had to look like they were here and a weathered. And some of the images you might have seen like this wooden texture, and that is representing the hemlock trees. They were very symbolic here on the site, and that's where that credit card was found just minutes after the crash. But this particular design was selected by, there was first a committee made up of family members, first responders, community members, and they would narrow the 1,100, because that's such a huge number, down to a smaller number, and then a second grouping made up of a similar grouping of those people, not the same ones. They would select the final design, which this is all designed by Paul Murdoch. And Paul Murdoch is out of Los Angeles, California. And he was actually here this past year, of course, for the 20th observance, and we were really lucky to have him here. But we also have videos on our website of him talking about the design and how he came up with certain aspects. So if you're interested, I can put the link in somewhere, I'm sure, and help you find out more information for the design.
Sorry to interrupt real quick, Ben, but Catherine, if you want to put that in the chat here, we can put that into the comment section for everyone. Or we can do that later too. Sorry, Ben.
Yes, no, either way. We certainly can get that out to everyone. Let's see. You touched on it there a little bit. So we had a question concerning whether the family members of those lost on Flight 93 had anything to do with developing the memorial, and perhaps what they might still have to do with the site as it's still an active location.
That is a great question as well. And what I can say is that the families have been involved here since the very beginning. In the hours following September 11th, the county coroner here, Wally Miller, was able to bring them together following this terrible, terrible day, and told them and basically what to expect and what they were going to see during the investigation. And they came together as a group. And then they would form eventually their own nonprofit organization called the Families of Flight 93. And what's incredible about this story, and a lot of people are related to Civil War soldiers, and you have it at Gettysburg, but here you can run into someone that's a family member almost any day. And they're often here for every birthday, anniversary. Family members like to interact with our visitors, and is the beauty of the memorial too, is they're part of the journey that we've been from, just a humble bare roots memorial to the incredible place that we are today. So they're here often walking among you, and you never know it.
Wow, and that surely must be very powerful for anyone that comes and visits. Considering that, I'll tie that into this question concerning how the national memory has been shaped since then, and how these memorials, the ones like this one, as well as this one, might change that. There's a film about Flight 93. You even mentioned, for those who remember that day, personally, I was 6 months old. So how are these things maintained, or how does these sites contribute to the national memory?
Wow, that's a great question also. What is incredible about any historic event is that we continue to share, not just our lived memory, but our perceived memory and our learned memory. And what I'm learning every day here as a park ranger that interacts with the public is that our future is so important. And it's the school kids that come in from all over the country and want to learn this story. And it's walking through the exhibit and learning about the phone calls that were made and how a single person can truly change history. You just don't realize it in the moment sometimes, but making a phone call can sometimes literally change the course of history. And that morning, you know, these people were just ordinary people. They were flying for their grandmother's 100th birthday or for a funeral. There's so many reasons why the passenger and crew members were flying, and you put yourselves in those, you know, shoes. We fly every day, or we go to school, we go to work. And that's why these people were on Flight 93 or in the Twin Towers or at the Pentagon. And you think of, you know, yes, it's been 20 years, but the story is still very relevant in our minds, and it has affected how we do our life today. The next generation may not realize how different life is, but as they learn this story, they're like, wow, things were really different 20 years ago. You could fly with a pocket knife in your pocket and things like that. But then also how a single individual can truly change history, and uniting together with complete strangers. Like, these people didn't know each other when they got aboard Flight 93. And when they did get aboard, start making phone calls, they came together and worked together and did something amazing.
Certainly, and it's very powerful. Is the memorial open year-round for visitors who would like to come and pay their respects?
Yes, it is. It's an incredible place to come and visit no matter what season. We're open every day of the year. Their visitor center is closed only 3 days, and that's Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. But the grounds are open every day unless it's like severe weather. And we do get a lot of snow here. So if you're visiting in like January and February, expect snow.
Well, that's good to hear. And on a similar note, this site is a bit different than other sites that we virtually visit with, National Historic Sites and the like, because it's an active memorial. And so what kind of things happen at this site? Are there events, or are there a lot of commemorative things? Is it always oriented towards mourning and remembrance? What does that dynamic look like?
Wow. So being here, this is my 7th year working at Flight 93. And, you know, every day is so very different, but I can say it is so peaceful here. And I think a lot of our volunteers and staff would say the same thing, but our visitors that have never been here, I don't know, you know, necessarily what you expect when you visit a memorial. I think everyone has their own idea. But when you come to a place and you feel just like the peace and serenity, and you kind of get the idea of, you know, the mission here and is to honor and reflect on the actions of these 40 men and women. And that alone is incredible. Just talking to people and getting like what their experience is walking around the memorials, hearing the Tower of Voices with the wind chimes. And then, you know, seeing the reaction when they see the crash site for the first time. It can be an emotional experience, but it also is, I think, a moving experience more than that. It's kind of, I think a lot of people are empowered by, you know, the actions of these people and like what they did that day. And by visiting the site, they're like, wow, like I'm going to tell other people about this place because of how incredible it is. It's the trees, and it was a scarred landscape. This was all surface mined, and it wasn't the beautiful fields of wildflowers and trees and meadows that you see today. It was a very different place 20 years ago, and how much the memorial has changed, and it will continue to change. It's also a living memorial. And with every tree that we plant, we continue planting hope and inspiration for the future.
Yes, that's wonderful, and that's how these things can be turned around, or like you said, be a living memorial. Along those lines as well, we have a question concerning the there's a, how to put this, reword this question to be succinct, but there's a very politicized nature to history and civics, and we divided country more so than 20 years ago. And how might this site, as you mentioned, these individuals on Flight 93 were strangers, just random Americans to each other, and yet we're able to come together in this moment. How might this site encourage that today, or be a space for that kind of unity going forward?
And it has been. You look at, what goes on in Washington, D.C., or any of like the big cities that have had riots, and you think about that and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have that in a place. And the thing is, what I've seen is that people come together here, and it doesn't matter who you are. I think it's more just experiencing what happened here and to tell this story. And we've had people from all over the world, because September 11th didn't just affect Americans. And in fact, Flight 93 had people from, New Zealand and Puerto Rico and Germany and Japan. So there's people from all over the world that come here because they want to visit where people from that were aboard Flight 93 were from, but also, just to see the memorial as well. But we also, in political climates, have, a lot of feelings. And with that, you bring people together too, to tell this story. This is not a story of, red, blue, black, or purple. It is a story of people coming together, and amongst tremendous odds, they could have sat there and done nothing that day. And they decided to do something. And I think that brings us together. And it's a very American story, even though not everyone was an American aboard the plane. But you think of, what brings us together is often the hardships, and around the world too. You think of people struggling and you want to help. It doesn't matter who they are. And I think that's what happened that day. And when they learn about aboard Flight 93, what's going on the ground, and they realize this plane could also hit a building. Flight 93 is a 18 to 20 minute flight past to Washington, D.C. And had this plane not ended up in a field, it could have ended up in the middle of Washington, which is the center of our government. And we believe the intended target was the Capitol building. And it would be a very different story if it hadn't crashed here in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Certainly. Bravery is probably the word that comes to mind pretty quickly for many. I think this is our last question. I don't think I'm missing any, and that would be, how can you go about joining the ambassadors?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So there is on our website, and I'll just put the link for Get Involved. You can reach out to our volunteer coordinator, and we have ambassadors actually that come, oh my gosh, there's a guy from Washington, D.C. that drives in. So, I mean, he's not volunteering every day, but when he's driving through, he's like, hey, can I volunteer for a couple hours? We also have people that come in and just spend the afternoon, helping pick up garbage or weed flower beds. So it's not something that you have to do all the time. And volunteers are always, the most important group, I think, because they tell the story and they help make the memorial look as beautiful it does every day. They're not just, one person behind the scenes making the memorial look as beautiful as it is. There's lots of hands, lots of hours involved with every flower bed and the wildflower meadows. We just did a volunteer project as well. It finished this past year that we planted 150,000 seedlings over 200 acres of the memorial. And we started this project in 2012. And every year we'd plant, 15, 20,000 seedlings. This year we planted 14,600 seedlings. But in 20 years, those trees will grow and create a forest and bring in all kinds of wildlife and continue that story. So I will drop the link in there to get involved, and please reach out to our volunteer coordinator.
Perfect. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, well, I'll add that link to the chat for everyone watching at home. And it's great to hear all the work that's being done there. And it's such a difficult and important story to tell. And we thank you for taking the time and being with us today and sharing this story with us.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for letting me tell you just a small piece of the story. It is an honor and privilege to work here at Flight 93 and to just tell a small piece of it to you.
Thank you again so much. And thank you all at home for joining in. We'll be back here next week, Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Next week, we'll be with Jimmy Carter National Historical Park, and we hope to see you there. And Catherine, look forward to visiting in person. So thank you again. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.